We have to dive straight in with our main story this week, which concerns what's been happening in Minnesota, from the surge in immigration raids to the killings of Renee Good and Alex Pretty to the massive protests in the streets. And to be clear, for all this administration's talk of paid agitators, the protests there came from justifiably furious locals like this almost absurdly Midwestern man.
You know what really pisses me off is the fact that they detain people, cuff them, and then still beat the shit out of them. They tell you it's immigrants, only immigrants. It's fucking anybody. I have friends that got detained and all they were doing was fucking driving home from work. What the fuck?
Sounds like you don't fit the definition of the,
No, and I'm not fucking paid to be here like everybody fucking says. What the fuck is that? I gotta work in the goddamn morning, just like everybody else. I'm just here trying to stand up for community, dude. We're all human beings here. I don't give a shit who you are, where you came from, what color you are. It doesn't fucking matter. This is wrong.
Yeah, and you are acting like a bunch of dicks when you're provoking that level of response in Minnesota. A state whose whole thing is being Minnesota nice. They put it on merch. Other states couldn't pull that off, especially because Florida nice sounds like a brand of pills you buy from the gas station that makes your heart explode. And I will say, this does seem like a turning point for this administration on immigration. Polls show the majority of Americans do not approve of what's been happening, and nor should they. Because for all Trump's talk of targeting the worst of the worst, that rings pretty hollow when you see agents doing things like dragging a US citizen out of his house in his underwear through the snow and taking a 5-year-old into custody. It is frankly no wonder anti-ICE sentiment has spread to places that you might not even expect, from Pop-Tarts the Cat, who posted video with "fuck ICE" on it, to the subreddit Massive Cock, where users captioned dick pics with things like "how hard I get when I think about abolishing ICE," to an AEW match in Vegas earlier this month where this happened.
Now the face in the eyes of the champion.
Excellent. Well done to everyone involved there, from the crowd getting their point across in the perfect way to MJF going full Jim from The Office into the camera. The point is, to the extent they ever had it, ICE and Border Patrol have clearly lost the public's trust. And it frankly hasn't helped to see grotesque clips like this one at Mar-a-Lago on New Year's Eve of Kristi Noem dancing with Stephen Miller. Look, there is so much weird stuff going on in that clip that you probably didn't even notice the Ninja Turtle dancing with Vanilla Ice on stage there. Here is a better angle of Michelangelo being photographed at the exact moment he seems to realise just how many people in that room were mentioned in the Epstein files. Now, I should say, there have been some promising developments this week. Democratic leaders seem to have finally read the public's anger and are currently holding up funds for DHS as a whole as they push for new restrictions on immigration agents. And on Thursday, this happened.
Tonight, Border Czar Tom Homan says the massive immigration operation that's been going on for months in Minnesota, Operation Metro Surge, is coming to an end.
We've had great success with this operation, and we're leaving Minnesota safer. There were some issues here, and we address those issues. But I'm not going to sit here and say anybody did anything wrong.
Really? Well, first and least importantly, you are standing. Like, you're not going to sit there and say anything because you're a standing man. But I think it's pretty clear that a lot of people did a lot of things wrong, not least your tailor, because that suit looks like you bought it off the rack at fancy press conference clothes for uncharismatic business shreks. And look, I am glad for any drawdown that takes place in Minnesota, if it indeed happens. But even if every agent leaves town, much larger problems are going to remain both there and on the national level, because we are going to continue to see this administration obsessively pursue Stephen Miller's stated goal of racking up 3,000 arrests a day. So given that, we thought for our first show of the year, it might be worth pulling back a bit and talking not just about Minneapolis or even just ICE, but about the massive agency it's a part of, the Department of Homeland Security. Because as you're about to see, a discussion about it, its funding, and the sweeping powers that we've given it is long overdue. So tonight, let's look at DHS. And let's start with its origins, because while you might assume DHS is a long-standing part of American government, it's just 23 years old. It was founded as a response to 9/11, and if you are too young to remember 9/11, and I will pause long enough for the rest of us to experience the psychic gut punch of that sentence. Very basically, in the immediate aftermath of the most devastating terrorist attack in its history, America started screaming and didn't really stop for a decade. And while thankfully the Riyadh Comedy Festival has since healed the world through comedy, and we don't need to be worried about who or what was actually responsible for 9/11. At the time, a major concern was that prior to the attacks, there'd been a lack of communication and information sharing between federal agencies. So, the Bush administration agreed to combine a bunch of them under a single banner to improve coordination. But even back then, some felt that that was a bad idea, to the point that it was openly discussed in news coverage.
What do Secret Service agents have in common with animal disease researchers? Nothing, except that in 3 months, both will be working for the new Homeland Security Department. An organizational chart that could give a management expert nightmares. 22 agencies, 170,000 workers, the third largest department in the government.
OK, first, it is a little weird to introduce a government agency like it's a new sitcom. What happens when an uptight TSA agent and a laid-back FEMA official have to move in together? Find out in Homeland Security, Thursdays on TBS. But the larger point there, that this thing had been hastily cobbled together, very much holds, because all of a sudden, DHS contained everything from the Secret Service to the Coast Guard to FEMA and TSA. But for everything that went in, some key counter-terrorism agencies were left out, because DHS had to operate without the investigative, intelligence and military powers of the FBI, CIA and the Pentagon. But don't worry, because remember, they had those pig researchers, so they were pretty much set. Now, as a result, DHS tried to justify its existence in a number of different ways, including by explicitly linking immigration enforcement with countering terrorism. In fact, it was during the creation of DHS that parts of the Immigration and Naturalisation Service and US Customs Service were combined to form Customs and Border Protection and ICE, the two agencies that we know and are being terrorised by today. But oversight of all of this was a total nightmare, as the members of Congress that oversaw all of those agencies didn't want to give up control. So DHS found itself answering to around 100 committees and subcommittees, which, as the chair of the 9/11 Commission explained, caused chaos.
Think of having 100 bosses. Think of reporting up this way and that way, trying to do your job, and yet you're reporting to 100 people. It's crazy because it makes no sense, and you could not do your job under those circumstances.
Yeah, that does make sense. Having an endless cavalcade of rapidly changing bosses would clearly be a distraction, though I've got to say, you do eventually get used to it. I don't even know which of these companies is going to be my new business daddy yet. It's like a Mamma Mia situation, except less fun and way less sexy. But incidentally, if it is indeed Netflix, sorry for all the times I called your catalogue a who's who of the fuck is this. Loved the ending of Stranger Things, by the way, very brown. And good luck with Detective Hole. It sounds great. Now, complaints about the unwieldy nature of DHS persisted over the years, and yet despite that, money kept flowing into it, even as it became known for things like its mass surveillance programs, particularly of American Muslims, and its widely mocked colour-coded terrorism threat chart, which never dropped below yellow. It also became notorious for its willingness to distribute billions of dollars to state and local authorities. In fact, on the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, one California news station compiled just some of what that money had been wasted on.
Marin County received more than $100,000 in surveillance equipment to protect its water treatment system from terrorist attack. 4 years after the money was handed out, state authorities found $67,000 worth of gear still in boxes. It had never been used. Several counties and cities bought Segway scooters for their bomb squads. Each one cost $4,700.
OK, first, I'm not sure anything says we have too much money more than buying a fucking Segway. And second, that is just an unfathomably dorky look. It doesn't scream brave bomb diffuser as much as it does beekeeper mall cop. And with expenditures like that, it's no wonder that a 2015 report from a Republican senator found that despite spending over $500 billion, DHS was not successfully executing any of its 5 main missions, and its primary counter-terrorism programs were yielding little value. But because no one in power back then wanted to break apart something that had Homeland Security in its name, DHS remained the largest federal law enforcement agency with massive funding, sweeping surveillance authority, and worryingly unclear checks on its own power. It was essentially a loaded weapon sitting on a president's desk in the Oval Office, only held back by their personal sense of temperance and restraint. All of which brings us back to this fucking guy. Because in his first term, Trump and this sleep paralysis demon used DHS to push everything from his Muslim ban to family separation to his efforts to end DACA. But from the very start of Trump's second term, it was clear they had much bigger plans for DHS, starting with the fact Trump put one of his biggest allies, Kristi Noem, in charge of it. And even news stories about her announcement at the time contained some pretty clear hints that she was a bad choice.
Tonight, President-elect Donald Trump expected to name one of his staunchest campaign supporters. Are you ready? South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem to lead the massive Department of Homeland Security. Trump once considered Noem as a potential running mate, but her star dimmed after writing in her memoir that she had shot and killed the family dog.
Yeah, not great. And even Trump, who has been endowed by Satan with an ability to survive any bad press whatsoever, somehow knew that picking a VP who bragged about speed-running Old Yeller is a bad move. No one wants to share a ticket with John Wilkes Wolf here. In fact, Trump was so turned off by Noem's dog news, he apparently said to Don Jr. afterwards, "That's not good at all. Even you wouldn't kill a dog, and you kill everything." Just another brief window into a family dynamic that a skilled therapist would describe as cha-ching. And crucially, Noem didn't bring a lot of non-dog murdering experience to the job. She'd never worked in DHS or indeed law enforcement, but in a foreshadowing of things to come, as governor of South Dakota, she was a relentless self-promoter. In As for her state, she appeared in various job-themed costumes, including a dentist, a nurse, an electrician, a plumber, a welder, and a construction worker, selling each role with incredible charisma.
South Dakota has the blueprint for success. Recently, we led the nation in new home building, but we're still growing so fast. We need to hire more builders to keep up. So I'm pitching in.
Look, I know her performance is pretty flat there, but in her defence, who's going to tell her that she can't act? Not anyone who likes their dog, that's for sure. Also, I'm in a bit of a tough spot here because I refuse to comment on a woman's looks, but one of my female writers has insisted that I read something that she's written, and I also refuse to silence women's voices, so given that... A ponytail, for practical working purposes, is intended to keep hair off the base of the neck and/or out of the eyes. If you leave the front part of your hair out and keep the bottom part of your hair down loosely around your shoulders, it's not a working ponytail, it's a hairdo. And John, please do make sure that you put that second hair in air quotes, because there is just no way that Clydesdale tail is the real hair of that dog killer with a bad filler. Her words, not mine, her words, believe women. And the thing is, Noem immediately brought to DHS that same unrelenting focus on PR, from shooting a video in the Salvadoran Secot prison while wearing a $50,000 Rolex, to cosplaying as a law enforcement agent, from wearing a bulletproof vest on the streets of New York, to putting on Coast Guard fatigues, to dressing up like a Border Patrol agent on Fox News. And if it seems like she's got cameras with her wherever she goes, it's because she basically does. Here she is with a camera crew on the roof of an immigration detention facility outside of Chicago. And fun fact, these two men, Carl Frankovich and Juan Munoz, were protesting outside that day only to be arrested. And to hear them tell it, that seemed to have less to do with their actions and much more to do with the presence of Noem and her social media crew.
An agent grabbed me, threw me down. I was then zip-tied and detained.
I was pulled to the ground and ordered arrested. It felt very much like we were just being used for this political theater.
Kristi Noem was able to walk past us, surrounded by photographers, videographers, essentially just getting us in the background as she walked by.
Then look what happened. Homeland Security sent out these social media posts showing Kyle in handcuffs. This one said, "We will not allow violent activists to lay hands on our law enforcement." And they also posted this government promotional video. And there's Kyle again. He and Munoz were never charged with any crime.
That's true. Despite being labelled violent activists, they were never charged with anything. So it seems they were arrested just for a photo op for Kristi Noem, which is, if I may quote her own dog's dying words, rough. But it goes way beyond optics. Noem has been put in charge of DHS at a moment when it's experiencing an unprecedented funding surge. Trump's big, beautiful bill last summer essentially doubled DHS's funding over the next 4 years. And it's worth looking at where all of that money is and, equally importantly, isn't going. Because DHS's resources are now being pointed at immigration more heavily than ever before, to the point that it's been called a veritable Department of Deportation. ICE alone was handed an extra $75 billion to spend over Trump's term, tripling its annual budget, and leading to this startling fact.
Overnight, it became the highest-funded federal law enforcement agency in US history. If ICE was a military, it would be the 17th richest in the world, worth about the same as Canada's entire armed forces.
It's true, and whatever the appropriate budget for ICE is, and they're making a pretty compelling argument for it being zero right now, one thing it should definitely not be is the same as the entire Canadian military. Though, to be fair, that's not a perfect one-to-one, as I'm pretty sure the Canadian military doesn't totally eat shit on slightly slippery sidewalks. Now, a lot of that money is earmarked for immigration detention facilities, the conditions at which we have talked about before on this show, and which are unlikely to get better given ominous headlines like ICE begins buying mega warehouse detention centres across the US. But a lot is also going to hiring thousands of new ICE agents, with DHS planning to spend $100 million over a one-year period just on advertising. It's part of what is called a wartime recruitment strategy, and those ads are everywhere.
Slickly produced social media videos.
Join ICE and help us catch the worst of the worst.
Televised ads targeting local police. And a celebrity endorsement. These are all part of a major multi-million-dollar recruitment campaign launched by the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency. It's shared images using wartime imagery like Uncle Sam and slang like in this post with the caption, quote, "Want to deport illegals with your absolute boys?"
That's going to be on social media. It's going to be through streamers, so YouTube and other places where user-generated content is, but also large-scale broadcast and streaming platforms like Hulu, HBO Max, Amazon Prime, all of this sort of thing.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't love hearing my employer's name on that list. Though I guess at least I do get a reminder of what the company's name is this year. It's also slightly satisfying to know that one place those ads have been running is in front of AEW Wrestling, meaning that ICE is having to pay money to appear alongside this. It's still very good. Now, DHS claims those ads are working. They say they've hired 12,000 new ICE agents and officers since last summer. And while there are good reasons to believe those figures are inflated, we're still going to have a lot more ICE agents on our streets this year, and that should be a real concern. Especially because to hire so many officers so quickly, they've had to significantly lower their standards for new recruits, doing things like waiving age requirements, condensing the training period, and ending requirements like taking 5 weeks of Spanish language training, which is a bad idea for many reasons, including those agents now won't get to understand even a little bit of Bad Bunny's music, which is sad for them. They're missing out on a lot of joy, plenty of political commentary, and a metric ton of blowjob descriptions. There is a lot in... It's a rich text. And the thing is, even with those lower standards, one report found that more than a third of new ICE recruits had failed a physical fitness test that required 15 push-ups, 32 sit-ups, and running 1.5 miles in 14 minutes, which, and I do not say this lightly, is a test even I could pass. Also, and more upsettingly, nearly half were later sent home because they couldn't pass the written exam, which covers things like when officers can and can't conduct searches and seizures. And it gets even worse when you learn that during that test, they were allowed to consult their textbook and notes. Yeah, half of them failed an open book test. And as we all know, that is the easiest kind of test, even easier than urine. That one is actually harder than you think. Midstream is a delicate dance. And as the former acting director of ICE points out, this is all a very bad sign.
Yeah, I mean, like some of these moves, frankly, have resulted in some embarrassing candidates. ICE agents have tremendous authority when they're out there on the streets. We have to know that these people, A, have that integrity, are going to, when no one's looking, are they going to do things the right way? And secondly, they're getting into this for the right reason. Obviously, there's a tremendous concern as well that the administration is going after individuals who harbor some animus towards immigrants.
Right, because it doesn't seem unfair to assume that some might have applied for that job less out of a sense of public duty and more because they, I don't know, want to deport illegals with their absolute boys. And that concern has been compounded by a disturbing pattern of what sure seems like white nationalist dog whistles in these recruiting ads. Like this post reading, "Which Way American Man," invoking a meme associated with this anti-Semitic book popular among neo-Nazis. And this one using the phrase, "We'll have our home again," the title of a song released by a white nationalist band popular with far-right groups like the Proud Boys. And if that connection seems at all like a stretch to you, you should know the Proud Boys themselves don't seem to think so.
On the messaging app Telegram, one chapter reposted that ad next to a picture of a literal dog whistle, adding the line, "Message received."
Oh, cool. Although I do have to say, the whole point of a dog whistle is plausible deniability. So saying "we hear and understand your dog whistle" does sort of wreck the whole agreement. But I guess that is the risk that you run when your secret master plan has to rely on some of the dumbest people alive. Now, I have to tell you, we reached out to DHS for comment and they angrily denied any dog whistles, adding, "We will not apologise for using patriotic messaging and symbolism in our advertisements." They also told us, and I quote, "One could say we are homeland maxing by removing illegal aliens and defending our borders," a sentence I genuinely feel dumber for saying out loud. So, that is where money and resources at DHS have been surging too, but the administration is also pulling resources away from other key parts of the agency. And let's start with just the reallocation of resources under ICE. Because for the record, before Trump came along, deportation was not ICE's sole focus. It actually consisted of two branches: ERO, or Enforcement and Removal Operations, which handles detentions and deportations, and Homeland Security Investigations, or HSI, which is tasked with complex investigations into things like drug smuggling and human trafficking, with many of their targets not even immigrants. Diddy's case, for instance, was run by HSI agents. And many HSI officials have long wanted to be formally separated from ICE, and for obvious reasons. If you need cooperation in a human trafficking investigation, it's harder to get it from someone who thinks that you might deport them. But in Trump's second term, he has gone hard in the other direction, signing an executive order on day one, announcing enforcing immigration law would be the primary mission of HSI. And that has had real consequences, as highly trained agents who specialised in things like money laundering and counter-terrorism cases have now been sent to do things like pick up people in parking lots. Here is a guy in an HSI jacket arresting people at a Home Depot in LA last year. And that is not good, because there's probably other important stuff he was supposed to be doing that day. In the first part of last year, HSI agents worked an average of 33% fewer hours on child exploitation cases, which is just maddening. There is a reason episodes of SVU don't involve them abandoning a case halfway through, because they then have to go spend the rest of the episode harassing people outside of a fucking Lowe's. People would riot. But it's not just reallocations within ICE. Not only have CBP agents been diverted from the border, they've pulled in law enforcement from outside of DHS. According to one estimate, last year, 1 in 5 US Marshals, 1 in 5 FBI agents, half of DEA agents, and over 2/3 of ATF agents had been reassigned to help handle deportations. And look, I'm not saying everything those agencies were doing was a good use of their time. For more on that, see any number of episodes of this show. But it is notable that for all Trump's justification of immigration crackdowns to fight drugs and cartels, as this former DHS intelligence official points out, that's exactly what is being deprioritised.
If FBI agents are not working on drug gang task forces, then there are fewer investigations into violent street gangs and drug trafficking cartels.
And with such a large contingent pulled from their duties, he says drug cartels and bad actors are watching.
I am 100% certain that they are tracking that federal agents are being moved out of drug task forces and seeking to determine ways to exploit the reduced resources on those task forces.
Yeah, of course cartels are going to take advantage. Drug kingpins, by and large, aren't stupid, mostly because drug kingpins who are stupid tend to spend a very short time as kingpins and much longer as a suspicious mound of earth somewhere in the Mexican desert. It's kind of a self-editing field. And I'm still not done listing misallocations of resources because at the same time that Noem has surged funding to some areas of DHS, she's actively starved others. For instance, CISA, which handles cybersecurity, lost roughly 1,000 staffers, more than a third of the agency, meaning it is now less equipped to do things like protect our electrical grids or secure our elections. But maybe the biggest example of a department being hamstrung is FEMA. It is the agency that handles the federal response to disasters. Many believe it never really belonged in DHS in the first place, and that its ending up there contributed to its failures during Hurricane Katrina. And if you're too young to remember Hurricane Katrina, I'm afraid you're just going to have to fuck off. Suffice to say that FEMA did not have a good Katrina. Perhaps best summed up by this entirely fair question in front of a flood-damaged apartment complex. Now, soon after Trump took office, FEMA lost about a third of its total full-time staff. And it's also been heavily impacted by a new rule across DHS, which states that every contracting grant over $100,000 must now cross Noem's desk for approval, or to put that in terms that Kristi Noem can understand, 2 wristwatches. And that requirement is clearly absurd generally, but especially at FEMA, an agency that handles emergency relief that needs to get out quickly. At one point, about $17 billion in federal disaster funds for states was held up for an extra layer of review by Noem, causing unusual delays in payments. And I'd say that I can't even imagine how chaotic that process must look. But luckily, I actually can, because another of Noem's South Dakota ads literally showed her as an overworked accountant with ticker tape all over the place, not exactly doing a great job.
We have close to 20,000 open jobs, including accountants. So I'm filling in.
South Dakota, freedom works here.
Governor Noem, you didn't carry the 2.
Josh, kiss my abacus.
OK, it seems once more I find myself in a tough spot, because again, I have been told to read something to you, and I don't feel like I can say no. The precise way for you to describe what Kristi Noem has actively chosen to look like there is mother of the bride who asked for the exact same hair as the bride. Also, John, while I have your attention, maybe it's time for you to be putting a little grey in the eyebrow makeup. You're not fooling anyone. Let's be adults about this. Those are her words. She's brutally honest. Brutally honest. She's a bad person. The future is female. The thing is, Noem delaying funding approvals at FEMA has already had serious consequences. When there were deadly floods in Texas last year, 2 days after, nearly 2/3 of the calls to FEMA's disaster assistance line went unanswered. Now, I have to tell you, Noem has disputed that report, saying it's just false, and that report needs to be validified. Though I believe that sentence itself could benefit from being spell-checker rated. And not for nothing, Noem's $100,000 sign-off rule meant that, according to one former FEMA official, the FEMA building itself almost had its utilities shut off last year because the bill wasn't paid. And the truth is, so far, we've been incredibly lucky that there hasn't been an even worse disaster where FEMA's problems were more fully exposed. As last year, for the first time in a decade, not a single hurricane struck the US. But our luck can only hold out for so long. Last August, over 180 FEMA employees sent a letter to Congress warning that Trump officials' actions were risking a Katrina-level disaster, which is a pretty haunting thing to hear. And it's more than a little dispiriting to realise that the Frankenstein of an agency that we cobbled together after 9/11 is now siphoning resources away from things that actually protect us, even as it floods resources to a bunch of guys in ski masks with questionable Reddit histories who blast rap rock out of the window of their government-issued kidnap-mobiles, all for the benefit of Kristi Noem's fucking TikTok. So, what can we do? Well, first and most immediately, with DHS in partial shutdown over its funding, Democrats have to use every ounce of leverage they've got to get major concessions. Bernie Sanders has proposed an amendment that would repeal the $75 billion in additional funding that ICE received. And what I don't know if they'll be able to get all the way to that. They should at the very least get as many hard enforceable limits on immigration agents' activities as possible. Now, second, we need to get rid of ICE, period. Public trust in it right now is hovering somewhere between Purdue Pharma and the Titan submersible. It is just not salvageable. And if you're thinking, well, who will enforce immigration law if ICE is gone? I don't know, maybe the agencies that did it for decades before 2003. As for DHS as a whole, I would argue it's no longer tenable in its current form. And while maybe there is an argument for having a larger agency coordinating different federal departments. It should probably be redesigned from the ground up, and deliberately this time, not by suddenly gluing together org charts in a blind panic. But if I can make one last broader point here, cosmetic changes just aren't going to be enough. Because even if you get rid of Kristi Noem, which you should, Stephen Miller will still be there. And even if you get rid of him, this administration will remain. But even if they are gone and we get rid of ICE and DHS, we're still going to be left with the broken immigration laws that gave them permission to do what they have done. Millions of people will continue to be vulnerable because, as we've discussed repeatedly before on this show, our current immigration system makes it somewhere from difficult to impossible for many to come in the right way. That boy in the blue hat and his dad were scooped up despite being in the process of seeking asylum. And we've shown you multiple videos of people being arrested as they showed up for their immigration appointments. And that is actually a bit of a tell. Because that is clearly not this administration targeting the worst of the worst. It's them desperately trying to juice up their numbers. And it is the law that allows them to do that. And that is actually something that Tom Homan made a point of reiterating to people when he was first sent to Minnesota 2 weeks ago.
For the people out there who don't like what ICE is doing, if you want certain laws reformed, then take it up with Congress. Again, ICE is making this up. They're enforcing laws enacted by Congress and signed by the president. The same laws have been on the books for the last 6 presidents I worked for. If you don't like what ICE is doing, instead of protesting this building, go protest Congress. Tell me what changes.
Well, hold on there, Tom. Why just one or the other? People could absolutely do both. Porque no los dos, if I may quote a phrase it seems most new ICE recruits will have absolutely no chance of understanding. But he is right there. Trump's policy of mass deportations is built on existing laws. And if America doesn't like what that policy looks like, now that they've seen what it really means, then it needs to fucking do something about it. To the extent that we are all horrified by day labourers and grandfathers and little kids in bunny hats being terrorised by men in masks, then we need to elect people who will commit to writing laws that reflect that. And I've got to say, it does say something that to the extent that anyone over the last few months has been protecting our homeland and keeping it secure, it has not been Kristi Noem in her wide array of fun outfits or whichever 20-year-old dipshit's been pumping out Nazi-flavoured content on Twitter. It has been ordinary people on the streets of Minneapolis blowing whistles, delivering food to friends who are afraid to leave their houses and marching in the cold, even though they've got goddamn work in the morning. Because, if I may quote that gloriously frozen Midwestern man, they believe we are all human beings here and that this is fucking wrong. And now, this.